statement, I want to tell you that there are more and more reasons for us to be optimistic. At least outside this prison cell, where I've been held in captivity for more than 6.5 months now, it is now not only palpable that the tide has turned, but it is both clearly visible and clearly audible. At the same time, this worldwide development in the right direction is mirrored by what is happening in my case, except that last week an alarming twist in this never-ending story shows how now pressure is being put on the court by the intelligence services, and that one of my attorneys is receiving anonymous threats, which quite obviously come from that very same source. But let me first tell you about the positive developments that we can now clearly see and hear happening worldwide. As I already mentioned, it looks like my work, first at the Corona Investigative Committee and then at IC has been vindicated by the publication of the, albeit heavily redacted, RKI papers. RKI is the equivalent of the American CDC. These papers clearly show that Corona was not a pandemic, but a staged pandemic set in motion by the mainstream media, politicians, and others who got paid to induce panic among the population so that they could be controlled and made to destroy their own economy and their own health. On top of these now infamous RKI papers, the highly regarded former president of Germany's highest court, the Constitutional Court, Professor Papier, for months has now been asking for a judicial investigation of what happened during Corona, stating that the judiciary, and above all, Germany's highest court, the Constitutional Court, failed to protect the rights and values enshrined in the Constitution during Corona. Well, we can certainly help with this judicial investigation as we have all the evidence readily available. Anyone can easily download all the interviews I have conducted with, for example, Dr. Mike Yeadon, the former vice president of Pfizer, Professor Luc Montagnier, who won a Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus and then changed his mind, and like Dr. Judy Mikovits said, that it wasn't a virus that caused AIDS. I conducted interviews with presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Archbishop Vigano, Professor Sucharit Bhakti, Dr. Peter Breggin, former Premier of Newfoundland, Labrador, Brian Peckford, ritual abuse survivor Cassie O'Brien, and many, many others. It's all there. But there is, in fact, even more reason for optimism, as outside of Germany, the wake-up process has picked up so much speed that it is now unstoppable. Those on the other side of the fence, in particular those who are in the business of panic and warmongering, have now every reason to panic themselves. At Columbia University in New York, reminiscent of what happened 55 years ago, students, that's during the Vietnam War, student protests against the Vietnam War have now spread in its variation of protests against what's happening in Gaza, have now spread across the entire country and then worldwide. Once again, it is students and faculty members of Columbia University who are protesting against a war, this time the war in Gaza. More than 34,000 people were killed over the last 6 months, 70% of whom are women and children. And now 2 mass graveyards were found with more than 300 bodies of patients and medical staff of hospitals, many of whom showing signs of torture and execution-style murder. Neither the U.S. administration nor the EU is able to ignore this. Both have asked for an independent investigation into the massacres. The student protests have already spread to other countries, like, for example, Australia, and students and faculty members are now coordinating their efforts and connecting with each other. Sounds like real grassroots bottom-up democracy, standing up against globalistic, top-down totalitarianism to me. The protesters demand not just that the killing stops immediately, but they also ask, cui bono? Who profits from all this? In what ways? This means that just like during Vietnam, the protesters are breaking through the official wall of propaganda and want to get to the bottom of what's going on. Only this time, for real, it seems. Because I believe it is no accident that the calls for an investigation of these crimes against humanity coincide with the calls for an investigation into the corona crimes against humanity. The people on the other side of the fence are only one step short of the realization that the same puppets in the mainstream media politics and pseudoscience who got paid to lie to us about corona are now lying to us about Gaza. And from that realization will come follow-up questions, such as, for example, what is really going on in Ukraine, and what exactly is it with man-made global warming? And why are they trying to keep us in permanent panic mode? Good questions, don't you think? The positive developments are mirrored or reflected by what's happening in the criminal proceeding against me, except that here their panic is so great that they're now pushing themselves and the rule of law into very, very dangerous territory. On the one hand, their official narrative has collapsed. Both the hearing and the, albeit incomplete, that is illegally redacted contents of my file have shown beyond a reasonable doubt my taking a loan in order to protect some of the donations temporarily from imminent attachment of our bank account was perfectly okay, as I had both the authority to do this under the business judgment rule, and I was willing and capable of repaying the loan. The allegations in the criminal complaint, to the contrary, were simply freely invented lies, which the DA would have immediately uncovered had he conducted a real investigation and not just a fake one. The senior district attorney, who refused to even start a criminal investigation when she looked at the very same facts less than a half a year ago, or a half a year earlier, was correct when she came to the conclusion that there was absolutely no evidence of any criminal wrongdoing. But behind this travesty of justice, we can now see the real criminals. The three attorneys from Berlin and the assistant district attorney who cooperated very closely when they first had me kidnapped in Mexico and then got their hands on my money and the Corona Investigative Committee's money by way of fraud and extortion. Even my illegally redacted file shows that the assistant DA knew right from the start of his non-investigation that I was in the process of repaying the loan with the proceeds from the sale of my house, and that there was way more than enough money available for this. The file also shows that he knew full well that the three accusers had absolutely no right whatsoever to get their hands on that purchase price. And the file shows that he knew that the three authors of the criminal complaint would nevertheless engage in fraud and extortion in order to get their hands on that money. In fact, the criminals themselves kept him informed about their criminal activities. He not only allowed them to commit these crimes, rather there's now reasonable cause for a criminal proceeding against him for aiding and abetting their crimes, or at the very least for obstruction of justice. And those are real crimes, not just misdemeanors. But the matter gets worse. In full knowledge of the fact that the three criminals' only interest in the Corona activity, in the Corona Committee's activities focused on the donations it received for my work mostly, and knowing also, of course, that they had already stolen 1.15 million euros of my purchase price, he now attached my attorney's pension plan, collecting everything up to another 700,000 euros for these three criminals. But what is the reason for all this? Well, the secret dossier on me, written by the German intelligence services, proves beyond any reasonable doubt that the 3 Berlin attorneys and the assistant DA were instructed to do a kind of a hit job, to do the dirty work, so to speak, for those who are pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Ultimately, of course, this will backfire, as this will turn out to be a hit job on themselves and before the eyes of the world, a hit job on the rule of law in Germany. Why am I saying this? Well, last week, the intelligence services approached the presiding judge and his number 2 judge on the panel, in my case, and put them under pressure to, or at least they manipulated them. As a result of this, the presiding judge just informed us that despite all the evidence to the contrary, he will definitely find me guilty of whatever crimes. If any further proof was required to show that this is a fake trial that undeniably started with my kidnapping in Mexico, here it is. My attorney, Dr. Miseray, who defends me in this trial alongside my colleague Katja Verma, just received an anonymous letter with a photo of his daughter. Clearly a threat that something will happen to her if he continues to defend me. I will publish the details of all of this still unfolding crime story in my next statement. For now, let me conclude not with another list of my favorite songs, but by telling you that my favorite book is Harper Lee's novel To Kill a Mockingbird. And my favorite movie is the movie by the same name starring Gregory Peck. There will be justice, and if the system is too corrupt to deliver it, it'll come another way. Call it karma or poetic justice, but it will come. See you soon.